So you want to buy a restaurant inside an airport. On paper, it sounds like one of the smartest business investments you could make. Every day, tens of thousands of travelers walk past your front door. Most of them can't leave the terminal. Many are willing to pay $20 for a burger and $8 for a bottle of water without thinking twice. You'd assume the owner must be making a fortune. But here's the strange part. Some airport restaurants barely make any profit at all. Not because of bad food, not because of poor management, but because they're operating inside one of the most heavily regulated business environments in America. Your trash costs 4 times more to throw away. You might be forced to sell meals to airline crews at a loss. And if passenger traffic suddenly drops, you could end up trapped in a lease for years longer than you planned. So where does all that money actually go? To answer that, we need to look beyond the menu and into the hidden economics of owning a restaurant inside an airport. Most people think airport restaurants are expensive for one simple reason. Passengers don't have another choice. Once you're through security, you're a captive customer. If you're hungry, you'll probably pay whatever is on the menu. That explanation makes sense, but it leaves out almost everything that actually determines whether an airport restaurant makes money. A restaurant on a city street answers to one landlord, follows local regulations, and orders supplies through ordinary delivery trucks. An airport restaurant operates in a completely different world. The airport authority controls its lease. Federal security rules affect how food, employees, and deliveries move through the terminal. Airlines influence operating hours. Government agencies regulate everything from waste disposal to food safety. Even processing a customer's credit card can cost more simply because the card was issued overseas. In other words, the restaurant isn't just competing with the burger shop across town. It's operating inside a transportation hub where every square foot, every employee, and every delivery is shaped by rules that don't exist anywhere else. That's why 2 restaurants selling the same cheeseburger can have completely different economics. One might keep most of the profit. The other could lose a surprising portion of every sale before the burger even reaches the customer. To understand why, we first need to look at what it actually means to own an airport restaurant. In most cases, you're not buying a restaurant at all. You're buying the right to operate inside one of the most tightly controlled commercial spaces in the country. When most people hear the phrase restaurant owner, they picture someone signing a lease, renovating a building, hiring a chef, and opening the doors. That model works almost everywhere, except inside an airport. Owning an airport restaurant usually doesn't mean owning the restaurant at all. It means winning the right to operate inside a government-owned transportation hub. That right is awarded through a competitive concession contract, and getting one is far from easy. Instead of negotiating with a private landlord, operators compete in a bidding process run by the airport authority. Large companies spend months preparing proposals that include financial forecasts, restaurant designs, operating plans, and even promises about hiring local workers or partnering with minority-owned businesses. Winning the bid is only the beginning. Before serving a single customer, the operator often invests several $millions to build the restaurant. Unlike a typical storefront, every piece of equipment must pass airport security requirements. Construction crews work under strict access rules, and even something as simple as delivering kitchen equipment can take far longer than it would outside the airport. Then comes the lease itself. Most airport concession agreements require operators to pay whichever is higher, a fixed annual rent known as the minimum annual guarantee, or a percentage of their sales. Imagine agreeing to pay rent based on your revenue, even during slower months, while also guaranteeing the airport a minimum payment every year. It shifts a significant amount of business risk from the airport to the restaurant. For the airport, it's an attractive model. The terminal earns steady income, whether business is booming or slowing. For the restaurant owner, however, every sales forecast becomes critical. Overestimate passenger traffic, and the guaranteed rent can quickly become a burden. And that's before the first hidden operating cost appears, costs that most restaurant owners on the outside never have to think about. Once the restaurant opens, the expenses don't stop with rent, payroll, or ingredients. In fact, some of the biggest costs are so unusual that most customers would never imagine they exist. Take the trash, for example. If the restaurant is located inside an international terminal, the US Department of Agriculture treats nearly every bag of waste as a potential biosecurity risk. Why? Because passengers arriving from overseas may have brought meat, fruit, or other agricultural products that could carry pests or diseases. Once those leftovers end up in a restaurant's garbage, the entire bag becomes what the USDA calls regulated garbage. That means it can't be thrown into a normal landfill. It has to be sealed in specially approved bags, collected separately, and transported to licensed incineration facilities. The result is a disposal bill that can be several times higher than what a restaurant outside the airport would pay. Every meal sold in the international terminal quietly carries part of that hidden waste bill. Getting fresh ingredients into the restaurant is just as unusual. A delivery truck can't simply drive across active taxiways where aircraft are moving. Instead, food is unloaded at a secure warehouse on the public side of the airport. From there, many large concession operators use electric baggage tugs, the same vehicles that pull luggage carts, to move pallets of food through underground service roads and baggage tunnels. In other words, the lettuce for today's sandwiches may travel the same routes as passengers' suitcases. Running this miniature logistics network requires dedicated vehicles, specially trained drivers with airport security clearance, maintenance crews, and carefully timed deliveries that avoid interfering with airport operations. Every tomato, every carton of milk, and every case of bottled water costs more before it even reaches the kitchen. And then there are the costs hidden in plain sight. Restaurants overlooking the gates often advertise premium runway views, but those views come with a price. Jet engines produce enormous noise, and their exhaust leaves a thin layer of oily residue on the terminal glass. To keep those windows clear, airports charge tenants a share of specialized cleaning and maintenance costs through common area, maintenance fees, or cam charges. Decline the service, and within months the windows become cloudy enough to ruin the experience customers are paying for. By now, it's clear that airport restaurants aren't expensive simply because they can be. They're expensive because almost every part of operating one costs more than anyone expects. But hidden expenses are only half the story. Some of the rules governing airport restaurants don't just increase costs, they legally force operators to sacrifice part of their profits. High operating costs are difficult enough, but some airport rules go even further. They don't just make restaurants more expensive to run, they directly reduce how much money they can earn. One of the least known examples involves airline crews. At many major airports, concession agreements require participating restaurants to provide heavily discounted meals to uniformed pilots and flight attendants. These discounts, often around 50%, weren't created by the restaurants themselves. They were negotiated years ago between airlines and airport authorities to ensure flight crews had affordable meals while working long shifts. For restaurant operators, however, participation isn't optional. If the concession contract includes the requirement, they must honor it. Think about what that means. The same sandwich that sells to a traveler for $20 might bring in only half that amount when sold to a pilot. Yet the cost of preparing it hasn't changed. The bread, meat, labor, rent, utilities, and payment processing fees all remain exactly the same. On many crew meals, the restaurant earns little profit and sometimes none at all. So how do operators make up the difference? They spread the cost across everyone else. When travelers complain that airport food is overpriced, part of what they're paying isn't just for their own meal. They're also helping offset thousands of discounted crew meals served every month. It's an invisible subsidy that most passengers never realize they're funding. Another challenge begins long before most travelers even wake up. Unlike a neighborhood restaurant, an airport restaurant can't simply open when business picks up and close when traffic slows down. Airports require key concession locations to match the flight schedule. If the first departure leaves at 5 in the morning, the restaurant may be required to open at 3:30. For those first 2 hours, the kitchen could have a full staff on duty while only a handful of customers walk through the door. From a traditional business perspective, those hours make very little sense. Labor costs are high, sales are low, and the shift often loses money. Experienced operators have learned to treat those quiet hours differently. Instead of measuring them as profitable service periods, they use them as preparation time. Vegetables are chopped, sauces are made, inventory is checked, and ingredients are prepped for the lunch rush. The morning shift becomes part restaurant, part production facility. It's one of the few ways to justify paying an entire kitchen crew before sunrise. Even payment itself comes with hidden costs. International airports process an unusually large number of foreign credit cards. Many of those cards carry higher interchange fees than domestic cards, adding an extra percentage to every transaction. Restaurants can't legally charge international visitors more than everyone else, so they absorb the additional expense and quietly build it into menu prices across the board. By this point, a pattern starts to emerge. Airport restaurants rarely lose money because they serve bad food. They lose money because dozens of small rules and contractual obligations slowly chip away at every dollar they earn. And some of the most influential rules don't come from the airport or the airlines, they come directly from government policy. By now, it's obvious that owning an airport restaurant isn't just about serving food. It's about navigating a maze of regulations that can reshape the business in ways most owners never expect. One of the clearest examples involves who appears to own the restaurant. If you've walked through a major airport, you've probably noticed restaurants carrying the names of famous local chefs. At first glance, it looks like those chefs decided to open a location inside the terminal. Sometimes that's true, but often the real business arrangement is much more complicated. Many airports receive federal funding, and with that funding comes a requirement to provide opportunities for Airport Concession Disadvantaged Business Enterprises, or ACDBEs. These programs are designed to help minority-owned and women-owned businesses participate in airport concessions. The challenge is that opening an airport restaurant can cost several $millions before the first customer walks through the door. Most independent chefs simply don't have that kind of capital. Large concession companies found a solution. Instead of building a restaurant under their own brand, they partner with a well-known local chef or qualifying business owner. The chef licenses their name, recipes, and brand to the operator in exchange for a royalty, while the concession company finances the construction, hires the staff, manages daily operations, and assumes most of the financial risk. From the passenger's perspective, it looks like a local success story. Behind the scenes, however, the business is often being operated by one of a handful of multinational concession companies. Alcohol regulations create another unexpected complication. Several large American airports span multiple counties or even cross-state boundaries. That might not sound important until you remember that liquor laws in the United States are highly localized. Imagine a restaurant company operating two locations inside the same airport terminal. They're only a few hundred feet apart. They share the same customers, and they're managed by the same company. Yet if an invisible county line runs between them, each restaurant may need a completely different liquor license. Different licensing authorities can impose different operating hours, different rules for Sunday alcohol sales, and different reporting requirements. In some cases, the company isn't even allowed to move unopened bottles of liquor from one location to the other because each inventory is legally tied to its own license. Then there's the issue of seating. Airport authorities often require restaurants to dedicate a large portion of their leased space to customer seating. At the same time, they expect some of those seats to remain available for passengers who aren't buying anything at all. That creates an unusual business problem. The restaurant is paying premium airport rent for tables occupied by travelers eating sandwiches they packed at home. Some operators have responded in subtle ways. Instead of installing large, comfortable lounge furniture, they choose seats that encourage shorter stays. Power outlets may be limited, and bar stools are often designed to be comfortable enough for a meal, but not for spending 2 hours waiting for a delayed flight. It's a quiet form of economics hidden inside furniture design. Every one of these regulations has a reasonable purpose on its own. Together, they create an operating environment, unlike almost any other in the restaurant industry. But even after mastering contracts, regulations, and daily operations, there's one risk that no restaurant owner can control: the number of passengers walking through the terminal. By now, you might think the biggest challenge is managing costs or navigating regulations. In reality, the greatest threat to an airport restaurant is something it can't influence at all: passenger traffic. Unlike a neighborhood restaurant that can attract more customers through advertising or expand into delivery, an airport restaurant is almost entirely dependent on one number: the total number of passengers boarding flights. In the airport industry, this number is known as enplanements. Every business plan, every sales forecast, and every lease agreement is built around it. When passenger numbers rise, restaurants benefit almost automatically. More travelers mean more hungry customers, more impulse purchases, and higher sales. But when those numbers fall, the business can unravel surprisingly fast. The COVID-19 pandemic offered the clearest example. In the spring of 2020, passenger traffic at many US airports collapsed by more than 90% almost overnight. Terminals that normally handled tens of thousands of travelers each day became nearly empty. Restaurants that had invested millions of dollars suddenly had almost no customers to serve. Many operators couldn't simply close and walk away. Their leases still existed. Their equipment still needed maintenance. Many employees still had to be paid, and in some cases, they still owed guaranteed rent. To prevent widespread bankruptcies, many airports activated what's known as an enplanement circuit breaker. These clauses temporarily reduced or even waived the minimum annual guarantee, allowing restaurants to pay rent based only on the reduced number of passengers. For struggling operators, it felt like a lifeline. But the relief came with a condition that many people overlooked. Rather than forgiving the lost rent entirely, some airports extended concession agreements by the same amount of time the operator received financial relief. A business that accepted 2 or 3 years of reduced rent might later find its lease automatically extended by those same years. At first, that sounds fair. The airport gives temporary relief and later recovers the value through a longer contract. The problem appears when the airport itself changes. Imagine investing in a terminal that once served as a major airline hub. Then, several years later, the airline moves most of its flights to another airport. Passenger traffic never fully recovers, new restaurants stop opening, and travelers begin passing through a different terminal instead. The operator is now locked into a location that no longer generates the sales originally expected. The very clause that helped the business survive a crisis can also prevent it from leaving when the economics no longer make sense. It's a reminder that airport restaurants don't just depend on food, service, or pricing. Their success is tied to forces far beyond their control: airline strategies, economic downturns, public health crises, and passenger behavior. For operators that understand these risks, airport restaurants can still become highly profitable businesses. For those who underestimate them, the constant flow of travelers can create the illusion of a much safer investment than it really is. And that raises one final question. With all these hidden costs, regulations, and risks, is owning an airport restaurant actually worth it? At the beginning of this documentary, we asked a simple question. If airport restaurants charge so much for their food, why aren't all of them incredibly profitable? By now, the answer is much clearer. The high prices aren't simply the result of captive customers. They reflect an entire operating system hidden behind the kitchen doors. Every meal helps pay for premium airport rent, strict security requirements, specialized logistics, government regulations, higher payment processing fees, mandatory operating hours, and dozens of costs that most restaurants never face. That's why judging an airport restaurant by its menu prices can be misleading. A traveler sees a $24 burger. The owner sees lease payments, labor schedules, regulated waste disposal, security-cleared deliveries, and contracts that determine whether the business succeeds or fails. For experienced operators, these challenges aren't necessarily deal-breakers. Companies like HMS Host, SSP America, and Paradis Lagardère have spent decades building systems that allow them to operate efficiently across hundreds of airport locations. Their size gives them purchasing power, sophisticated logistics networks, and teams dedicated to navigating regulations that would overwhelm many independent restaurant owners. For smaller businesses, however, the barriers are much higher. The upfront investment can reach several $1 million. Profit margins are squeezed by contractual obligations that don't exist outside airports. And unlike a neighborhood restaurant, success depends heavily on decisions made by airlines, airport authorities, and even federal agencies, organizations the owner has little or no control over. The future may make some of these challenges easier. Mobile ordering, self-service kiosks, AI-powered demand forecasting, and automated kitchens are already helping operators reduce labor costs and serve passengers more efficiently. But technology won't eliminate the complex web of contracts and regulations that define airport concessions. If anything, the businesses that adopt these tools fastest will gain an even bigger advantage over smaller competitors. So, is owning an airport restaurant worth it? The answer depends on who you are. If you imagine it as a traditional restaurant with a constant stream of customers, you're likely underestimating the complexity of the business. If you understand that you're really operating inside one of the most tightly controlled commercial environments in the world, and you're prepared to manage contracts, compliance, logistics, and long-term risk, then an airport restaurant can become an exceptionally valuable asset. Because the real business isn't selling burgers, coffee, or cocktails. It's mastering an ecosystem where every passenger represents an opportunity. Every regulation has a price, and every flight boarding overhead quietly shapes the economics of the restaurant below.